We now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. We're a little less than 2 weeks into a new administration in D.C., with Wisconsin reacting to the back and forth over federal funding. Now, later in the show, Armand Rahman sits down with the Dane County executive for more on that local impact. We start this week with elections in the National Democratic Party. DNC delegates voted this weekend for their new party chair, coming up after those losses in this November's presidential election. Now, among the candidates were two Midwesterners, Minnesota State Party Chair Ken Martin and Wisconsin's own Ben Wickler. Now, Wickler lost that vote with about 31% support. And for more on the impact of this, we're joined by William Garcia. He leads the Democrats in western Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District. And I want to start with this idea. It might be a mixed bag for Democrats here in Wisconsin, where you don't see Ben Wickler at that national party level, but you retain him here in Wisconsin. How are you reacting to that vote?
I think you're correct. We are very excited to keep Ben Wickler as our chair. He has done an incredible job. I think Wisconsin Democrats are behind him 100%. I think it speaks a lot that every Wisconsin DNC member voted for him. But I'm actually a little shocked and surprised that the DNC did not take this opportunity to put Ben in charge. Ben is quantifiably, excellent at what he does. And so and of course, I'm a little biased. I live in Wisconsin, but because I'm so close to working with Ben and because I've seen for so long his quality, I'm honestly surprised that the DNC did not take him up on the chairship.
Now, I've heard this race framed with a little bit of an insider versus outsider connotation to it, with Wickler being a little bit that outsider there. Is that essentially the sense that you got from this race?
A little. I mean, it was really between two Midwest state party chairs, Minnesota and Wisconsin. I'm not sure it was so much of insider-outsider as it was kind of plans for what is going to happen next. And I mean, Ken Martin has done an amazing job in Minnesota. I'm not disparaging Ken in any way. We here in Wisconsin often look at Minnesota with envy and the things that they've been able to accomplish with a kind of Democratic trifecta. But still, working closely with Ben for the last 6 years now almost, I know how good he is at his job. I know how much he cares, and he would have been an excellent chair. And so I am kind of saddened for the National Party to lose that opportunity.
Now, coming up for Democrats here in Wisconsin, there's a leadership vote coming up this June, but there's also that key April election for the state Supreme Court. Especially for that April election, what does it mean for Ben Wickler to remain here in Wisconsin?
It's huge. And the April election is the most important thing right now. All of our eyes are focused on that April election and making sure that we maintain our progressive majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And so Ben's, just as you said, his knowledge, his expertise, just how good he is at his job is really going to be beneficial to us as we win that race in April.
Now, I remember speaking with Democrats in the 3rd Congressional District 4 years ago, where the National Democrats essentially pulled out of that race that was to retain Ron Kind's seat. Is there still confidence by Democrats, especially in western Wisconsin, with the National Party going forward?
No, not for that. I will say the National Party redeemed itself quite well in this last election in terms of western Wisconsin. Whereas they kind of pulled out 3 years ago, this last election, they were all in. They were working hard. They were doing the things that they need to do. So no, I don't think there's any I mean, it's politics. It's not ever a good idea to have lingering animosity. We always want to, we always fight for our position, and then when the fight's over, we shake hands, we make up, and then we start fighting again. And But no, I think in terms of National Party, there's no animosity. There's, like I said, just disappointment because I think they lost out on a really good chair.
William Garcia, thank you so much. When we come back, Armand Rahman sits down with the Dane County executive for more on how this week's confusion over federal funding impacts Wisconsinites here locally. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. We're coming up on the third week of the Trump administration, with the headlines recently dominated over the fight over diversity, equity, and inclusion. The president temporarily freezing this week all federal grants and loans in an effort to stop federal funds going to those DEI efforts. Now, that had an impact on Wisconsin as well. Armand Rahman sat down with the Dane County executive for more on that back and forth.
What are some of the, just maybe off the top of your head, just the different sort of agencies or different sort of, services in the community that do, that off the top of your head?
Let's talk about public safety, dollars that come from the federal government. How about children in need of protective services? How about the ability to make sure that our seniors are safe and other vulnerable people? So it ranges widely. Economic development, housing. These are all partnerships at all levels of government that allow us to deliver life-saving resources to people within our community.
So now that today that Trump, the administration rescinded that pause, but they said that they would be maybe putting out something similar in the future. Are you guys still kind of working earnestly to prepare for what that might be in the, coming forward?
100%. This isn't going away. I anticipate that for years we're going to continue to see actions like this. We heard last week different directives from the federal government when it comes to DEI, and we've been hearing for months and months, if not years, about attacks on immigrants within our communities. We're going to continue to see the chaos from our president and his administration and the effects here on our community. But ultimately, it's the job of the county to make sure that we are delivering high quality, predictable services to people here in Dane County. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to have to be innovative. We're going to have to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in DC. And that, frankly, is challenging because they don't want to be doing it in a way that is making it easy for us, right? Like there is intentional chaos in how these messages are being delivered to local governments.
And you obviously have your senatorial background as well before this. Tell me, sort of, have you ever encountered anything like this in your time serving as a public servant?
I was here. I was born and raised here in Dane County. I have never seen a federal government that is not stepping up and saying, how is it that we can make sure that we are serving the people in your community the best possible? And to me, I hope to have a relationship with all administrations. This isn't a red thing or a blue thing, right? And I think that's part of why it is that the Trump administration rescinded what it is that their original order was. It is having direct impacts on our veterans. It's having direct impacts on our businesses. It's having direct impacts on communities that vote for Republicans and for Democrats. We do need to be thoughtful about how it is that we deliver services. And ultimately, I want our country and our state and our county to be successful. And setting traps for people to prevent them from being able to be successful in delivering those services doesn't feel like a true partnership. I'm hoping that we can get to a point where there's a reset, but again, you have to believe what people say out loud. And right now, that means we have to keep our hands on the pulse and anticipate what's going to happen because it's not being told to us clearly.
So my last question for you, kind of tell me, the next maybe week, 2 weeks, now that you kind of know this is on your radar, like you said, it's not necessarily so unexpected anymore. What are some of the next steps you guys are going to be taking?
Well, we're not getting advance notice from the federal government before they put these memos out. So we're hitting refresh on our computers as fast as possible to make sure that we're as up to date with the information that's coming out of Washington, D.C. We're touching base with our congressional delegation, the people who we have elected to represent us in Washington, D.C., and making sure that we have clear lines of communication with one another, and making ourselves available to folks within our community so that we can try to calm the people who are part of Dane County's family to ensure that we're delivering on our promise of the Dane County way.
When we come back, we start our series of one-on-one interviews with the candidates running to be the state's top educator. Ellie LaLiberte sits down with Brittany Kinzer right after this. Welcome back. This spring's election will be dominated by a state Supreme Court race, a constitutional amendment question, but also a race for DPI superintendent. Now, that superintendent of public instruction helps set statewide education policy. And we have two candidates running to replace the incumbent in that February 18th primary. Ellie La Liberté begins our series of sit-downs with the candidates, starting with Brittany Kinzer.
To get us started, tell me a little bit about yourself, about your background, and why you think that you're a good candidate for this position.
Great. So I've been in education my entire career. I started off as a special education teacher, then a science teacher. I'm an award-winning principal, and now I'm running a literacy initiative. And I am here because, and decided to throw my hat in the ring, because I am very concerned about only 32%, 3 out of 10 students in Wisconsin are career and college ready, according to our nation's report card. And when I heard that DPI lowered the standards this past summer, I know that kids deserve so much better, and I decided that I wanted to run for DPI and ensure that we are focusing on reading, writing, and math so kids can get a meaningful job, they can attend college, or they can master a trade. And so that is a little bit about my background and like why I'm running.
And so I was looking through your campaign, and a big part of it was this standards, and you just brought that up.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about those standards. You said that you didn't agree with those cut scores. What do you think of the current legislation that's recently proposed to try to kind of bring those back to national standards?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we restore the high standards. This is for the nation's report card or nation standards. We don't want to lower them like they are right now, because we know, and I know, that when we set expectations high for kids, they can meet that. They can meet expectations. We should be going for 10 out of 10 students who are prepared, career and college ready, not 3 out of 10. And I 100% agree with the new proposal for the new bill to ensure that our standards are restored, and agree with the governor also that they need to be restored. We need to have high standards. It's really, really imperative. And if I can talk a little bit more about that, in Wisconsin, our kids are not just going to compete against Wisconsinites. We know this is a global economy, a national economy, and we need to make sure that our children are prepared for a bright future. And so that is why I think it's so important that we restore those standards.
And so speaking of the governor, at the State of the State address, made this year the year of the kid.
Yeah.
So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so fantastic. You know, part of my campaign's all about putting kids first and making sure that they're getting a great education. And my focus, again, is really focusing on restoring the high standards, making sure that they're learning how to read, write, and do math so that they're prepared for college or career, that we're partnering with parents because they're really the true champions of their children, and making sure that the funding is getting into the classrooms for our teachers, and also making sure that DPI is transparent, predictable, and innovative. So I'm very excited that this will be, the year of the kid, and making sure that we're putting children first.
And kind of going off of that funding, there's a problem with teacher recruitment in the state and retention, with nearly 40% of first-year teachers leaving the profession or the state altogether within 6 years. So how would you plan to attract and retain those educators here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so we need to make sure that we have different teacher pathways and innovative pathways for our teachers, to attract teachers here, and then also to retain our teachers. And so there are some districts who have great ideas on different teacher apprentice programs, also attracting teachers who possibly, I just was talking to a school about how a scientist came into the classroom and decided she wanted to teach science, and she was on an we call it, it's like an emergency license, and then got certified. So we have to be able to find pathways that other states have also implemented to ensure that we can attract and retain our teachers. And again, part of my platform is making sure that the funding is going into the classrooms, and that we are paying our great teachers so that they can stay in the classrooms.
And so a big part of this funding for that budget, obviously working with the governor and the legislature, how would you work with those two entities to get that funding that you said is so important?
So I've already I've already done this where I have worked with the legislature and the governor's office on a different bill, and it's really important that you're having conversations and have that rapport so that you're really able to focus on what's best for kids and families. And so I already have that experience, and I would continue to have, build on those partnerships. We all have to be talking. I mean, this is about our kids' future, right? And so I would continue with those conversations and making sure we can figure out how to find common ground so our kids can get what they need.
Wisconsin also saw a record number of districts go to referenda this year. What would you look to do to help from districts having to ask their voters for more money? That's been a really big concern, especially here in Madison. We just passed the largest in the state. So have you given that some thought as well?
Yeah, so again, I think that we need to make sure that the money that we are getting is going into the classrooms and for our teachers, and then those are low. So from DPI, my jurisdiction is not to tell. I don't have the jurisdiction over local districts. So if they want to go to referendum and their communities vote yes, then that's what they can do. So DPI does not tell districts whether or not to go to referendum. And I'm also just making sure the legislature and the governor passes those bills on whether or not the funding. But again, I think we need to be really transparent about how we're spending our money in each of the districts. Where is the money going? In my experience, I've worked on a very frugal budget because I worked in charter schools too here, and being able to find efficient ways to make sure you can run your schools off of the budget that you do have, and making sure that you have the quality teachers and the support you have in your school to have a great school.
And so kind of going off of that charter school, talking about the school vouchers, can you give me a little bit of your stance on maybe possibly raising the eligibility for the school vouchers, anything around that concept?
So I'm the only candidate that is pro school choice, and I am for school choice for families. I think that parents need to be able to choose the best school for their child. And so that is my stance on that. But my focus really is making sure no matter what school that the children go to, that we're raising the standards and that they're being taught how to read, write, and do math so they can get a meaningful job, they can go to college or master a trade, so that all children in all the schools. I think sometimes we focus too much on the different institutions instead of what do all the children need. And right now we only have 3 out of 10 children who are career and college ready. We need to be talking about that. There's a lot of other things being talked about, but we need to make sure that we have a focus so that all of our children are able to, go to college or get a meaningful job. And I know I keep saying this, and master a trade, but it's so important that we start focusing on that, because that is what's going to decide whether or not children have a bright future. So,
Madison Metropolitan School District, second largest in the state. How do you plan to work with larger districts to help support those?
Yeah, so I plan on working with with all the districts, right? Making sure we have the partnerships, and DPI being a place that is transparent and predictable for districts, innovative, being a place where schools can go for best practices, so that they can build on what they have to make it better, or if there's some kind of, I know I said Madison, but other school districts need some kind of school improvement, we can be that place that schools can trust, and parents alike, for best practices and innovative practices. We can learn from other states and actually some other countries too that are doing great things, and we need to bring that to Wisconsin and even make it even better.
Awesome. And so, kind of rural districts as well. There's a couple in our viewing area that are, having problems with funding and thinking about dissolving. That's been an issue here. So is that something that you've thought, okay, how can we support those smaller districts as well? What would that look like?
Of course. Again, I want to be able to partner with those districts and be able to help them figure out how do we solve this issue. We need to be able to have that communication and partnership and finding innovative ways to make sure all of our kids in Wisconsin, whether, all throughout Wisconsin, are getting the best education possible, and that we're helping support our school districts. We need to have that partnership with them.
And so another big conversation kind of coming up recently is also, LGBTQ plus youth, kids who want to go by different pronouns, who want to use a bathroom that they align with their gender identity, as well as sports. How do you handle that in classrooms, that conversation?
So as just another reminder, DPI does not have jurisdiction over all of that. So that is a local control issue. So we want to make sure that the communities and the school boards and the school districts and parents are working together on what's best for their schools. I think that's really important. I have my own personal beliefs on that, but again, like my personal beliefs are not going to tell the school districts what to do. My belief is that, for your biological sex, you should be in the sports that your biological sex is, and then also for bathrooms, also again for the biological sex, you should be going into those bathrooms. But we need to make sure that all kids are feeling safe and welcomed, and so there are situations where students will then, if they're not feeling safe, they can you work with the parents and the school team, not from GPI, but the school team and the parents, where they can use the family bathrooms usually are one room or like a staff bathroom, so that all children are feeling safe. And so making sure again that we're working with our kids and our families.
We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. In the Capitol, there's been a fight over the first proposal coming out of the new session, with Democrats criticizing Republicans for, before anything else, approving a constitutional amendment requiring photo IDs for voting. Now, that's a little bit different than a law, and we learned this week that the first bill introduced this session is an education proposal. It would undo some of the changes that the current DPI administration made to the rubric that the state uses to evaluate whether schools are failing. And that does it for us this week. I'm Will Keneally. Have a great rest of your weekend.
This has been For the Record.